the right to their pension rate of pay after a lifetime of work when they reach the age of 65. They also want the choice to work on their same terms and conditions of employment. In short, workers want choice, and I agree with them. That is what this motion is about this evening. It's about giving workers a choice, making a public declaration that we listened to them in the last election and that we have not forgotten the message that they gave us. After a lifetime of work, I and Sinn Féin believe that a worker should be able to retire on the full pension rate of pay. That was abolished by the Fine Gael Labour government in 2013, and we want that position reversed and to be replaced with the choice to access the pension rate of pay at 65 or work on the same terms and conditions of employment. That is a very important part of this motion. We want to see TDs here tonight backing the position that workers should not just have the right to work on where their contract says they must retire at a certain age, but that those workers should not be forced to take lesser or different terms and conditions of employment, that they should have the right to work on the same terms and conditions. I would very much welcome the views of the Minister on this matter, and I feel this is very important. Workers who want to work on, and there are many reasons for this to be the case, not least of which the skyrocketing cost of housing. They shouldn't have their terms and conditions diminished, and in fact the state should protect their terms and conditions where they exercise the right to work on. There are many workers in what we call arduous employments. They spend all day on their feet, carrying heavy loads, cleaning, working outdoors in all weathers. When they get to 65, their shift is done. They are ready to retire and they want the dignity of the pension rate of pay. They have paid tax all their working lives and they want to be able to access the pension rate at 65. I don't know that many of us in here will ever understand what a lifetime of back-breaking work does to a person's body, but we can certainly show empathy and we can try to understand that for many workers, they are simply not able to continue past the age of 65. Being able to access the pension rate means that they can realistically consider stopping work, and if you're waiting tables, if you're laying blocks or stacking shelves or cleaning or any other physically demanding work, then that extra year makes a huge difference. I understand that the Minister will come in and read the script and try and deflect from the issues and maybe try and score a few political points, but I would genuinely caution against that. This is a Dáil motion. It gives you the opportunity this evening to debate and to speak directly to those workers, to let them know where you stand on this important issue. So I would ask you to address your remarks directly to those workers. Let them know if you are prepared to hear their concerns and fears about being denied the pension rate of pay at the age of 65 after a lifetime of work. To outline the government's position on the right to work on past the retirement age, that's in your contract, but on the same terms and conditions. And I really want to hear the government's position on this and to recognise the contribution that these workers have made for their whole working lives. Ceann Comhairle, we often stand in this chamber and we say politics is about making choices. We have a choice here this evening. Sinn Féin have chosen to use our time to amplify the concerns, and they are very real, of these workers about the mean-spirited move to raise the pension age. We want to use our time to let the government know that workers want, and more than that actually, they deserve the choice at the age of 65. Because when you hit 65 in this day, chances are you have been working for decades. Chances are you've been paying tax for decades. Chances are you've been paying PRSI for decades. And chances are actually that you started work believing that you would be able to retire at the age of 65. So we want to ask the government to join with us here this evening to support older workers, to give them the dignity. And dignity is a really important word here, because you talk to people on the doors, and obviously we have a by-election, we have the opportunity to engage with people on the doors now, and that's what they'll tell you. There is dignity in being able to access the pension rate of pay at the age of 65, and we are simply asking that the government would join with us in supporting that. Gurmai agat Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you. Deputy Clerk Curran. Minister, there is a fundamental difference in opinion in relation to your view and the view of your government and our view when it comes to retirement. You think it's appropriate for people at retirement to be paid a job seeker's rate of payment of €203 a week, and we do not. You think it's fine for workers who've paid into the social insurance fund for decades, some for 30, 40 and more years, not to be able to access their pension at retirement, and we do not. And to be clear in what we are seeking in this motion here this evening, it is to restore the state pension transition for those people retiring at 65, and I think it was a mistake to abolish that in 2014. And I'm still waiting for someone in government to tell me what will happen if pension age increases go ahead. Will we have a situation where the new benefit payment for 65-year-olds will become the new benefit payment for 65 and 66-year-olds? And we'll have a situation where there's a gap of 2 years and people are paid a job seeker's rate, losing out on over €4,700 in those 2 years. We must be the only country in the world to place people who are retiring on a job seeker's rate payment. And I know in your contribution this evening you will tell us how adequate our state pension rate is, and you'll probably compare it to the rate in the north. But of course that is not what is in question here this evening. The rate in question is €203 a week. And let us be very clear, that is a payment rate that is far from adequate. In fact, it is set below the poverty line. And when you talk about adequacy, you do not talk about the cost of living. And we had a Eurostat report issued today showing prices in Ireland for goods and services are the joint second highest in all of Europe. Prices were 36% higher than the average across the EU last year. We are one of the most expensive countries in all of Europe for food costs. Utility bills here are 78% more expensive than the EU average. So we really should leave the argument in relation to how adequate our rates are right there. You will also tell us there's no mandatory retirement age in Ireland, which also ignores the reality that every year people are forced to retire at the age of 65 because they are contractually obliged to do so. This is an issue, and it was acknowledged as an issue in the last Dáil term when a Sinn Féin bill to abolish mandatory retirement was passed unanimously by every single person in this House at that time, and we need to progress that. So let people, where they wish to, where they are willing and able to remain on at work, but also let them continue to pay in and to contribute their PRSI into the social insurance fund. So they keep paying into it, and that is a win-win situation. This is something you've committed to in the programme for government, but it can only be a benefit if we allow for longer working lives. I expect you'll also use the North not just to compare what is beyond comparison in relation to the rates, but also the fact that we have a state pension age of 66 in the North, without putting on the record, and it is important to do that in relation to the reality in the North. Westminster determined the pension age, and they decided to increase the pension age to 66. And if we departed from that move, we would have to cover the cost out of a tiny block grant that we get to run the North. That is a fact. And the Minister will also know that we have extremely limited revenue-raising powers in the north of Ireland. And it's important to put that on the record because it is common practice in here for the government to use the north, rarely in any positive way, but typically in debates like this in particular. And I think it shows a real arrogance and a real ignorance on behalf of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to throw an argument like that out. And I think it really shows a lack of information in relation to how the North works. So we make no apology in standing here today in, I think, reiterating the calls that were very clearly made by the people when they went to the polls last February in the general election. And we make no apology for standing here today and for saying that we need to put an end to the mad situation of, number one, telling people you're 65 now, you can no longer do your job, and secondly, you're retiring, you've done your day's work, you've contributed for decades, and now we'll give you a job seeker's payment of €203. It's an insult. The people have said it, they have been clear, we are saying it, and we are clear, and I hope that the government will consider supporting this motion here this evening. Gur maith agat.
Ich habe to Chris Andrews, 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Laskin Corla. Minister, every year in Ireland, workers are forced out of their employment for no other reason than they have turned 65 years of age. Irish law allows their age to be the defining factor on whether they can continue employment, regardless of their ability to carry out the work. This is possible because Irish law allows employers to impose mandatory retirement ages on their staff's contracts of employment, in effect facilitating ageism within the workplace and creating a set of second-class employment rights for older workers. Every worker in the state makes a significant and valuable contribution to the state during their working lives. We talk about looking out and looking after older people who have contributed to this state throughout their lives, yet we force them onto the dole queue when they hit 65. And we all know that the vast majority of people at 65 are not going to get a job. That's the reality. At a time when citizens should be able to take the foot off the gas or continue working, this government wants them to sign on the dole. It's a charade, and the government are forcing older people to take part in this particular charade. To make matters worse, the government wants them to take part in the charade for less money than they would have got on their pension. Talk about rubbing salt into the wounds. Workers should have the right to retire at 65 with their state pension, or the freedom to remain in work if they should decide to do that. This government can't keep moving the goalpost when it comes to the retirement age for the pension, state pension, from 65 to 66 to 67 in the new year. The government's next move would be to increase the pension age to 68. So where will it all stop? That's a real concern. 68 would be one of the highest pension ages in the OECD. If someone wants to retire at 65, then that should be their choice and take into consideration their physical and mental and family circumstances. They must also have the choice to work on. Gurmagut.
Dr. Kathleen Function.
Thanks very much, Laskin Corla. First of all, I want to thank my own colleagues, Deputy Louise O'Reilly and Deputy Claire Curran, for bringing forward this important motion tonight. Raising the pension age was a significant issue. I think others have mentioned that on the doors in the last general election. And, you know, obviously, I personally didn't hear anybody disagreeing with it, any of the meetings or any of the debates I was at, so I don't think there should be any difficulty with everyone supporting the motion here this evening. We as a society should be striving to ensure that if you want to retire at 65, then that choice is yours. Of course, we do know that some people, you know, prefer, and that's their personal choice, they'd like to continue to work. However, you should not have to continue to work. You should be able to retire at 65 if you wish. And a number of employment contracts stipulate an end of employment date in line with an employee turned 65, and since the abolition of the state pension transition payment, thousands of 65-year-olds have had to sign on for a job seekers payment. And obviously, you know, I come across a lot of people who just, they don't ever want to put themselves through that. They're having to go in and sort of sign on for any sort of a transitional payment. They feel they've worked hard. Many of the people we're talking about have been working since they were teenagers, and they feel they should be able to get the pension at 65 without having to get a sort of an in-between payment, let's say, or job seekers allowance. I also want to mention the issue of women when we're talking about pensions, because actually many women, women outnumber men among the age category of over 65. However, only 1/3 of those in receipt of a full state contributory pension are women. So I know that the Women's Council were calling for a rethink on the pension policy to one that places equality and living with dignity in our older years at the centre. And I just want to take the opportunity to mention that, because again, here we have women being failed by the state. I don't think any of us at this stage are surprised by that, but it is an important issue. So I just, time is limited, so I want to say that obviously I think this is a really important issue, and I want to really briefly mention that many people who are receiving a pension have often said that they do feel like the forgotten category in the country because their cost of living has increased, and yet every now and again they get a paltry €5 increase. So it's just important that we remember that category of people as well. Cost of living doesn't go away just because you turn 65, 66. And it's very, very difficult sometimes for people to live on that, particularly when you're more dependent on maybe, you know, medical services and your fuel costs and everything else. in terms of being elderly. So I just think it's important. We were great in this country for setting up, age-friendly and all these type of initiatives, but we're not very good then on following through on actions that support them. Thanks, Lascan Carla.
Lascan Carla. Nuair a dhéanamid Conra agus ha mé caint ó hefn stáite le daoine bacordóibh clí leis agus de lán daoine atá ag srisint ís pension inis. Bhí Conra déinte ag an stáit láimh. Gealú dóibh nó ris siad ís 65 go mbeidh cadacha $1 a pension le omláin an pension acu. Lic an stáit ortha le daoine, lic an stáit ortha faoin na réalta sternach, agus is mór an trú é sin agus is droch nós é lic ar daoine. Tá luaite ag na tachtaí Róm an fághfuil daoine ag éirí $1 pension, mar tá siad a lánacha briste, treis dahad a chuig bliain ag obair. Tá an drum briste, tá an sláinte briste, tá fiú an meabhar briste ag a roiinteacha. Daoine eile, tá siad ar bar a chláinte agus tá siad ag éirí sulta bhaint as na léinn de déirnach có agus asúlagum de lánacha go mbeidh níos mó ná trocha bliain acu. But tá siad treis íoc isteach in san coiste sóisialta. Agus tá siad I didal an tarigid sin a háil ar ais I bhfuair an pension agus sin fág an nentar I sin íoc. So we have to change our attitude for pensioners. They have been promised that they would be paid once they reach 65, that they would be looked after, that society looks after them. It doesn't. As other deputies have already mentioned, utilities in this country cost a fortune. Most pensioners I know are worried about where the money is going to come to maintain their houses, where the money is going to come if the landlord throws them out to pay the rent or if he increases the rent, where the money is going to come for the food. And their savings, they know, won't last, what little savings some of them have. So while people should have the right to remain and work, they should have, in particular, the right to retire at 65 as they have been promised, but also that the pension that they retire on, if they've paid into a pension, that it is fit for purpose, that they can enjoy their retirement. And remember, it's to enjoy their retirement, not survive their retirement. Go Margaret.
Margaret, I have to Denise Mitchell.
Margaret Lascan Carla. I want to start by thanking Deputies Louise O'Reilly and Claire Curran for bringing this important motion to the House tonight. People should be entitled to retire at the age of 65 on a full state pension if that is their choice. It's unacceptable that people are expected to sign on to job seekers at the age of 65. The decision to get rid of the state pension transition payment was cynical, and that needs to be reversed. €45 a week might not sound like a lot of money to some, but it is a huge difference to people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's heartless to expect people to wait for their pension and then to go on and penalise them in the process too. People had their voices heard during the last election. They told us they wanted the option to retire at 65. Talk of increasing the pension age to 67 or 68 targets those who are in their last few years of their working lives. The government are looking to move the goalposts just when these people are looking forward to retiring. This debate should be about giving people a choice. You will have many people who want to work beyond the age of 65, even well into their 70s, and they should have the right to do that if they feel fit to. But we need to act now, and we need to give people a right to access their pension at the age of 65 if that's what they want to do. They've worked and contributed to their pension for 40 or 50 years. They can't continue to treat those reaching the age of 65 with such disrespect. They've been the backbone of every sector in Irish society for the last 4 or 5 decades. They deserve to be treated with dignity by this government, and I hope everybody will support this motion tonight.
Sinn Féin, Martin Brown.
As much as the government may want to ignore the message sent in the 2020 general election, Sinn Féin is here to remind you that the pension age is one of the biggest issues in the course of that campaign. Voters sent a clear message that they wanted to restore the right to retire at 65 on the full pension rate, and Sinn Féin is making good on its promise to continue to campaign for that very right. However, despite the message that was sent loud and clear, the government has failed to act. Instead, they opted to stall the matter and resist bringing about the change that people call for. And while the legislation that had sought to raise the state pension even further has been repealed, there is still the need for a new law to replace it. This is where the Pensions Commission that was appointed by the government last November comes in. It is expected that when the Commission reports in the very near future, its findings will influence the course of action the government will take. But there is considerable concern that the Commission does not include any representative from the groups particularly affected by pensions change. Who will be the most affected by the decision that is informed by the Commission's report? We've seen concerns about the gender pay gap and the glitches around those who are required to retire at 65, yet neither the National Women's Council nor Age Action are represented on the Commission. And let me remind this House that the National Women's Council said that the Commission lacks the balance needed to arrive at conclusions that can accommodate a range of interests, especially those most affected by the pension age increase. What this bill also seeks to do is to resolve the issues that successive governments have seemed incapable of resolving. Only recently I had a constituent who is approaching pension age contacting me asking why, if they choose to work past their retirement date, their PRSI contributions will not be counted towards their state pension. We seek to address that in this motion. We are also demanding a commitment from the government to restoring the state pension transition payment for those retiring at 65 years of age. The government's handling of this issue has been chaotic, to say the least, and shows a total lack of appreciation or regard for the years of service these citizens have put into supporting the state. They now deserve to be supported through just and comprehensive policies. And to lead on from this, Sinn Féin is also calling for mandatory retirement to be abolished in most cases, and for workers to have the choice to work to retire or retire as long as they are fit to do so. And for those workers who do choose to work on, that they are able to do so on their own terms and are not compelled to sign fixed-term or short-term contracts of employment. We brought this motion forward because it represents the message sent in the last general election, and because the current government can't understand that our workers deserve the right to retire at 65 and the choice not to.
As we heard, this government intends to raise the pension age to 67 as of next year. Forcing people to work years longer who are planning and expecting to retire is wrong. It is even more wrong because collectively those of us in this Parliament who are making these decisions and forcing them are not being asked to do the same. In 2028, they intend to raise it to 68 years of age. This has been met with widespread opposition from trade unions and the wider workforce. My own union, SIP2, launched the Stop 67 campaign. They understand that many workers, particularly manual workers, cannot physically do the work they have done for decades. Minister, bricks and blocks do not get lighter as you age. Under pressure during the last election, one government party, Fianna Fáil, promised to at least restore the transition pension so that those of 65 did not have to sign on the Dáil for a year after retirement. So far, An Taoiseach and Fianna Fáil have not delivered on that promise. By removing the transition pension, the last government unofficially raised the retirement age to 66, and as a result, a lot of 65-year-olds who plan to retire cannot afford to stop working. This is unfair, callous and wrong. The government must stop its attempt to force through planned increase in state pension age to 67 in 2021. It must restore the transition pension and the right to retire at 65. Those workers have worked hard all their lives, paid their taxes, paid into the system, and who deserve their pension at full rate. These workers should be treated fairly and with dignity. Working beyond 65 must always be a choice that a worker makes for themselves. Some may wish to keep on working and should be enabled to do so. Others will want to retire and enjoy the future of their labour. No one else should be forcing them to make those decisions.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Firstly, I welcome the chance to speak on this important motion. The state pension age was a major issue back at the time of the last election, and it remains a major issue for thousands of people right across the state. Sinn Féin will continue our campaign until the government's plans to raise the pension age are scrapped and the pension age is restored to 65. The government's plans to raise the pension age next year to 67 and up to 68 in 2028. The state pension transition payment has been abolished, leaving thousands of 65-year-olds having to sign on to job seekers. There are thousands of people in receipt of a €203 job seekers payment instead of the state pension, which is €45 per week higher. This amounts to an annual loss for a person who retires in this state of €2,355 per annum. These are people who have worked hard all their lives. Some of them have worked hard in physical jobs for decades. They have earned their right to retire at 65 and they've paid their taxes, Minister. That's something you seem to forget. When people come of pension age, they have already paid their taxes for their pension. They've paid their social insurance contributions all their working lives. And some TDs, the people who are making these unjust laws, can retire from the age of 50, should they choose to. Some of them will be retiring to enjoy big fat pensions also. We can't have one rule for people in here and another rule for everybody else. And it is wrong, it is just wrong to make people's working lives longer without giving them any say or choice whatsoever. For those who wish to remain at work after 65, we support them in this. Nobody should be forced to stop working against their wishes either. We need a fairer system that suits the needs of people as they reach the traditional retirement age. We have to support those who want to continue working, for example, by ensuring that their PRSI payments count towards their state pension. And we must also respect that others will want to retire at the age of 65. We need an end to mandatory retirement, we need to restore the state pension transition payment, and we need to keep the pension age at 65. We need action on this, Minister. There's been too much flip-flopping and indecision from government, and we know what the people want, we know what the unions want, and we fully support them.
Gomagad Alaskan Korea, engaged on Chief Boalum Tracer, Makujakoglaki, Nachachti, Kran, Agus O'Reilly, as an rune, Tawak, Shaw, her Oscor, and Dáil, and Nocht. Belair on Tauchan and Nuri, Keiko Tawak, is the Taw Kesht, Ish, and Fenshin, Godnad Nadina. Being Keshaw, a male and Fobble, Agus Bibiog, Chach, a Lower Melob, Agus Meg Stockerocht, Nar Orde, and Keshaw. Neilcha Feralcha, Agus Mohi and Dina, Nachwacha Feralcha, Gomoch Dina egober a healer fad agus I genturum gomosha Jesh Jacob an finchna all agus I chaska kuig blian dish agus a nish ton realtas ará lob nach shin marveishe gomai urhu an luntus cordahori pushta all ke gomohin shiad gocha nan rob a kriach nusus lena bost agus gocha ro yaker rob lanacht urhu. Agus dócha go se tau dúine mar hachtaí ará gur féidir le daoine leanacht orthú ag gobar agus I de gairí ní sinne. Ach bhí fearháin arálum gro se ag gobar ar feadh a híal san airnal tógála. Agus nachrá se inán leanacht airgol sús agus an nuas dréimrí agus é ag an ís sin. Vír dul luntas cordóirí puist gon chéadúir ina híal agus é ina rire ag ís a finsin bhris se sin a chrí. Agus tá se solar óna nína go greidirn siad go láidir go gafar é seo a ahrú agus tá hééis cleistan ón aire go teag rá nach mai siad a carnaí an rún. Ach ní hé sin mar a géine agus taú leis an rún seo, agus taú leis na níine atá ag rága soléir go bhfuil siad a gcéire an pensionna áil ag ís seaca cuaig sin atá rá ag daoine agus sin an rud ba chór torlu. Also, given that we're on the topic of pensions, I'd like to raise a related matter to the Minister that I hope he'll look at, and it concerns the PAYE tax credit as it relates to contributory pension. And the 2013 Finance Act did away with this credit as it applied to dependents. So, for example, a husband could avail of this tax credit as it applied to his own contributory pension, but not for his wife, as was previously the case. And this means that some dependents are now ending up with a tax liability, and this issue is mainly affecting older women. So I'd ask the Minister to examine this and, of course, to support our motion in full.
Thank you very much, Lascan Corla, and I welcome the opportunity to speak at the conclusion of this important debate here this evening. And I want to thank all of the deputies for their contributions here this evening. I do want to draw the Minister's attention to one fact, which is that there is no representative from the National Women's Council. There are named on the Pensions Commission, there are named representatives, and then there was one representative from the ICTU, one representative from IBEC. There are no specific representatives from the NWCI that I could see. I just checked it there before I rose to speak. So I think that's a very important clarification, because as we know, women disproportionately are impacted by the pension situation. And I wouldn't call it a crisis, because although the Minister is right to reference that governments across the globe have to deal with the issue of pensions, it would be very helpful if the somewhat hysterical language is taken out of it. We don't have a demographic time bomb. It's a good thing that people are living longer. We don't have a pension crisis or anything like it. In fact, what we have is an opportunity to look at the economy and how it is structured, to look at the low pay, the precarious work, and the way that you have built and constructed the labour market. And this provides an opportunity actually for growth, and growth is very important. It is very important that we grasp the opportunity to fund our pensions through growth. And when I say growth, I mean the growth of decent jobs and the elimination of precarious work. So decent, well-paid jobs afford us an opportunity to grow and to ensure that we put pensions onto a sustainable footing. And I think that's important. I think that's a very important lesson for the government to take on board. So don't try to demonise people who've worked all their life, get to the age of 65 and want to retire. In fact, what we should say to those people is, thank you, you've done your shift. You're 65 years of age, and you will now have the opportunity to access the pension rate of pay. That's what Sinn Féin believes. It's what we know workers want. And workers are not foolish. They don't seek out things that will crash the economy. And I'm sure, obviously, the speakers from Fianna Fáil, indeed, and the Green Party know well how to crash an economy. But that's not what workers want. Workers want to know that their pensions that they paid into will be available to them when they reach the age of 65, and that's what this motion does. It would facilitate workers accessing the pension rate of pay at 65. It would abolish mandatory retirement where that retirement is mandated within a person's contract, and it would allow workers to work on the same terms and conditions, because like other speakers, I was alarmed by the IBEC submission to the Pensions Commission that referenced the potential use of fixed term or altered contracts. In actual fact, what we're looking for is an extension of the contract to facilitate a person to work on past the age of 65. And indeed, when they reach the age of 65, to have the ability to exercise choice, because there's a lot of dignity in having a choice. And I think for a lot of people, particularly as it goes on the government side of the House, there's very little understanding of the options that are available to people. But at the age of 65, Sinn Féin believes that you should have the right to access your pension rate of pay, because much like the Minister of State when he said during his speech, from an adequacy point of view, the Irish state pension is excellent at protecting pensioners from poverty. Well, it is. But at the age of 65, we believe you should have access to that rate of pay, because it's not the label that you put on it, it's not calling it a pension that is a factor in the alleviation of poverty, it's the rate that you get. So at 65, currently, the thousands of workers that hit 65 since this government came in almost a year ago, those workers are on the job seekers rate, they're not on the pensions rate. So the Minister is right when he says, from an adequacy point of view, the Irish state pension is excellent at protecting pensioners from poverty. And what we are saying is, let them access that at the age of 65. At the age of 65, when their shift is done, when their work is completed, when they have endured, and some people do, and I'm not sure that maybe there's a massive understanding of this on the government side of the house sometimes, but people who do back-breaking work, people who clean, who wait tables, who lay blocks, people who work outdoors in all weathers, those people, when they hit the age of 65, are ready to retire. What Sinn Féin is saying to those people is, we believe you should be able to access the pension rate of pay and have the dignity to choose if you want to move, if you want to work on, to retain your terms and conditions of employment, or if you want to retire, to do so and access the pension rate of pay. There is almost unanimity, which is quite unusual, across the board. So the government say they are not going to oppose the Sinn Féin motion. That's a little bit disingenuous, I do believe, because not opposing something is not the same thing as supporting it. And I think the workers that are watching this this evening, particularly anyone in the age bracket of 60 to 64, they want to hear what it is that you think. So regardless of what commissions or reports or other mechanism you've used to try to sideline this issue, and for our part in Sinn Féin, we will ensure we keep this issue front and centre. We will ensure that we make good on the commitments that we gave to people on the doorsteps in 2020, because this was an issue, and thanks to people like the Stop 67 campaign, they put this issue on the agenda for those parties that needed it, because you see,
Deputy,
they know.
Just to let you know, your colleague Thomas Gould is indicating whenever you decide to...
Last Count Corla, I will finish shortly. So people know that we listened, that we heard their concerns, and that we are using our time here this evening to keep this issue on the agenda, because it suits the government to have this issue off the agenda. I mean, we know you by your record. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party. The Fianna Fáil Green government, when your back was to the wall, the first people under the bus, minimum wage workers. So we know if we do not keep this issue on the agenda, we know, because we know the history of governments and how people are treated. So we will keep this issue on the agenda. We will be as good as our word, and we will push hard and continue to do so to allow people the opportunity to retire with dignity on the pension rate of pay at the age of 65.
Thomas Gould to conclude.
Good Deputy O'Reilly for giving me an opportunity to speak on this very important bill. I suppose, Minister, just to highlight where we're at, during last year's general election, I was with the Sinn Féin President, Mary Lou MacDonald, and we were canvassing in Cork in the Blackpool shopping centre. And the amount of people who came up to myself and to Mary Lou to explain how angry and frustrated they were at what they perceived was the betrayal by the government parties, by the previous government, and by Fianna Fáil, in relation to the retirement age of 65. And in particular, there was one man who stood out, who said that he'd got his first job when he was 14 years old. He'd worked for 41 years non-stop in the same company as a boy, carrying wood and blocks, to when he finished up in management after going through the whole way. And he was retiring in March last year, and ye put him on the exchange, the last government put him on the dole, and ye kept him on the dole, as he called it. No, he said he never had a problem with the job seekers allowance, anyone getting it, because whoever needed it was entitled to it. But his problem was, after working for 41 years non-stop, that the government then, continued by this government, would not put that man on job seekers allowance. Where is the dignity and respect that people deserve as Deputy O'Reilly said, who worked hard jobs all their life, whether in factories, shops, hospitals, wherever they've worked, for them to be denied the right to retire at 65, to put them on job seekers, which is a lower rate than the pension rate. So the question, what we're saying, we hear the government are saying they're not going to oppose this motion, but are you going to support us? Are you going to support people who are 65 and give them the pension they deserve if they want to retire? A lot of people want to continue to work, and to them, we support that. But this is a rights issue, and the question here now, there was a lot of government TDs who are in this chamber now who promised the retirement age and the pension for those at 65. I think those TDs must stand by their word and live up to what they committed to. Gormagat.
Gormagat. Agus sin dearil leis an díosbarach ó híomh cuasaí pensionte is sí an cheis ná that go nentítar an tariscint. The debate on the private members' bill is concluded, and the question now is that the motion be agreed to. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Gur míle mágad. Agus